A 95-year-old man enters a luxurious restaurant, wearing tattered clothes, immediately becoming the target of cruel jokes and contempt. Little did the staff know that his worn-out appearance concealed a truth that would leave them speechless. When a kind-hearted woman notices his unique timepiece, she uncovers a story so extraordinary that it would change everyone's lives forever. The shocking revelation about his watch will make you question everything about judging people by their appearance. But this is just the beginning. What happens next in this story will leave you breathless. Like and subscribe right now to unlock the most incredible true story of the year, filled with unexpected twists, wartime secrets, and a revelation that will bring tears to your eyes. Don't miss out on the moment that made an entire restaurant fall silent in shame. Hit that subscribe button to discover how this remarkable tale ends. Harold Jenkins shuffled into Le Pavillon, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city, his weathered shoes barely holding together with each step. His old sweater, though clean, was full of holes, and his pants had clearly seen better days. At 95, he moved slowly, supporting himself with a wooden cane that looked as aged as he was. The restaurant's crystal chandeliers cast a harsh light on his worn appearance, making him seem even more out of place among the polished marble floors and elegant table settings. The maitre d' immediately wrinkled his nose at the sight of Harold. "Sir, I believe you may have the wrong establishment," he said, with barely concealed disdain. "Perhaps I can direct you to a more suitable venue." His perfectly manicured hand gestured toward the door, making it clear that Harold's presence was unwelcome in this temple of luxury dining. Several well-dressed diners turned to stare, some whispering and pointing at the elderly man. A group of young executives at a nearby table snickered, making loud comments about homeless people trying to get free meals. A woman in designer clothes clutched her purse tighter as Harold passed by her table, as if his poverty might somehow be contagious. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the restaurant like wildfire. "How did he even get past the door?" one diner muttered. "The neighborhood is really going downhill," another commented. The elegant atmosphere of the evening was being disrupted by the presence of this seemingly destitute old man, and the other patrons made no attempt to hide their disapproval. Harold stood his ground, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "I have a reservation," he said quietly but firmly. "Under Jenkins." His blue eyes, though clouded with age, held a spark of determination that seemed to hint at a deeper story. His hands, gnarled with arthritis but steady, reached for his worn leather wallet. The maitre d' checked his list with exaggerated skepticism. Finding the name, he couldn't hide his surprise. Still, he decided to make things difficult. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have a strict dress code, and frankly, your attire—" He left the sentence hanging in the air like a sword over Harold's head. Just then, Sarah Chen, a regular patron of the restaurant who worked as a curator at the city's finest auction house, looked up from her meal. Something had caught her eye, a brief glimmer of gold from Harold's wrist as he reached for his identification. Under his worn sleeve was a timepiece that made her gasp audibly. Sarah recognized it immediately, but it couldn't be. Could it? That particular watch was not just any luxury timepiece. It was a legendary artifact that hadn't been seen in public for over 70 years. If genuine, it would not only be worth millions, but would also tell a story that would change everyone's perception of the humble old man standing before them. The watch in question was a 1944 Patek Philippe reference, 1518 in rose gold, but not just any example of this already rare model. This particular piece had been commissioned by a resistance leader during World War II and had disappeared during a crucial mission in occupied France. Its unique engravings and modifications made it instantly recognizable to anyone who knew its history. And Sarah, as one of the world's leading experts in historical timepieces, knew its story by heart. The restaurant's sommelier, noticing Sarah's reaction, paused in his rounds. He had known her for years and had never seen her look so shocked. Her expertise in valuable antiquities was well known, and her opinion carried significant weight in the city's upper circles. As Sarah stood up from her table, her heart racing, she noticed other details about Harold that others had missed. His posture, despite his age and apparent poverty, carried a military bearing. The way he held himself, even while being humiliated, spoke of someone who had known both authority and sacrifice. The young executives continued their mocking, one of them now openly filming the scene on his phone, hoping to create a viral moment of what he perceived as entertainment. "Hey, old-timer," one called out, "I think the soup kitchen is down the street." His companions laughed, their expensive watches glinting under the chandeliers, modern status symbols that paled in comparison to the historical treasure partially hidden under Harold's sleeve. Sarah approached slowly, her trained eye taking in every detail of the timepiece she could see. The case showed the expected patina of age, the kind that couldn't be faked. The crown had the specific wear pattern she would expect from a watch of this provenance, but it was the hidden inscription she knew should be on the case back that would prove its authenticity, an inscription that, if present, would link this humble elderly man to one of the most daring and still classified operations of World War II. The maitre d' was about to speak again, likely to insist that Harold leave when Sarah intervened. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice carrying across the now hushed restaurant, "would you do me the honor of joining me at my table?" Her tone made it clear this wasn't just a charitable gesture. It was a recognition of something the others couldn't see. Harold's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Sarah saw something flash across his face, recognition perhaps, or relief at being truly seen for the first time in many years. The watch on his wrist suddenly felt heavier with the weight of its history, a history that was about to emerge from the shadows after 7 decades of silence. What Sarah didn't know yet was that this chance encounter would unravel a mystery that had puzzled historians and collectors for generations. The story behind that watch would prove more valuable than the timepiece itself, and by the end of the evening, everyone in Le Pavillon would learn a powerful lesson about judging others by their appearance. But first, they would have to hear a tale that began in the darkest days of World War II, a tale that had been waiting 70 years to be told. Sarah invited Harold to sit at her private corner table, away from the prying eyes and whispers of the other patrons. As he settled into the plush chair, she noticed how his weathered hands trembled slightly, not from fear or shame, but from the weight of memories her recognition of his watch had stirred. "That timepiece," Sarah began carefully, her voice low. "It's the missing Patek Philippe from Operation Nighthawk, isn't it?" The old man's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment his aged facade seemed to fall away, revealing the soldier he had once been. "You know about Operation Nighthawk?" Harold whispered, unconsciously running his thumb over the watch's crystal. "Most of those files are still classified." His voice carried the weight of decades of silence, of stories untold and sacrifices unrecognized. The maitre d', now intensely curious, hovered nearby, pretending to adjust table settings while straining to hear their conversation. The young executives who had mocked Harold earlier had also fallen silent, their attention caught by the sudden change in atmosphere. "I've spent my career studying significant timepieces from World War II," Sarah explained. "This watch, it was commissioned for resistance leader Jean-Pierre Dubois, but disappeared in 1944 during a crucial mission. The operation itself remained classified, but the watch became legendary among collectors. Some say it was worth millions, not just for its rarity, but for the secrets hidden within it." Harold's eyes misted over, as he carefully unbuckled the watch. "Jean-Pierre wasn't just my commander," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was my best friend." With trembling fingers, he turned the watch over, revealing an inscription on the back that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "Coordinates," she whispered, recognizing the seemingly random numbers engraved in the metal. But to what? "To the largest cache of stolen art the Nazis had hidden in France," Harold replied, his voice growing stronger as he began to tell his story. "You see, I wasn't just any soldier. I was part of the Monument's men, but my real mission was something far more secret." The restaurant had grown eerily quiet, with even the kitchen staff emerging to listen. Harold took a deep breath and continued. "It was June 5th, 1944, the night before D-Day. While the Allies prepared for the invasion, a small team of us had a different mission. The watch wasn't just a timepiece, it was the key to finding thousands of priceless artworks stolen from Jewish families across Europe." Sarah leaned forward, enthralled, as Harold described how Jean-Pierre had given him the watch just hours before their mission. "He knew the risks were high," Harold said, his voice catching. "He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would keep the watch safe until the time was right to reveal its secret." The young executive who had filmed Harold earlier had lowered his phone, his face flushed with shame. The maitre d' quietly ordered the staff to bring their finest wine to the table, on the house. But Harold barely noticed, lost in his memories of that fateful night. "We were betrayed," he continued, his hands clenched. "Someone in the resistance had turned. Jean-Pierre sacrificed himself to ensure I could escape with the watch. His last words to me were, 'The art belongs to the families, mon ami. Never let them forget.'" Sarah's professional composure cracked as she realized the magnitude of what she was hearing. This wasn't just about a valuable timepiece. It was about justice, long delayed, about families who had lost everything in the Holocaust, about a promise kept for 7 decades. "But why now?" she asked gently. "Why have you carried this secret for so long, only to come to a restaurant where you knew you might be noticed?" Harold smiled sadly, reaching into his worn jacket. He pulled out a carefully preserved newspaper clipping about Sarah's recent work in returning Nazi-looted art to survivors' families. "Because, my dear, I'm dying. And before I go, I need someone I can trust to help me fulfill my promise to Jean-Pierre." The restaurant had transformed from a place of luxury dining into an impromptu audience chamber, with staff and patrons alike gathered in respectful silence around Harold and Sarah's table. The maître d', who had earlier tried to turn Harold away, now stood guard, ensuring no one disturbed this historic moment. "The coordinates," Harold continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "they lead to a hidden chamber beneath an old vineyard in the French countryside, but the watch holds more than just numbers." With practiced care, he demonstrated how the watch's crown could be unscrewed in a specific pattern, revealing a hidden compartment within the caseback. From this secret space, Harold extracted a miniature piece of microfilm, preserved perfectly for over 70 years. "This contains the complete inventory," he explained. "Every painting, every sculpture, every piece of jewelry stolen from over 300 families. Jean-Pierre and the resistance had been meticulously documenting everything, creating this record so that one day everything could be returned." Sarah's hands trembled as she carefully accepted the microfilm. Her years of expertise in art restitution told her that this could be the most significant discovery in the field since the war itself. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "do you understand what this means? There are families who have been searching for their heritage for generations." The young executives who had mocked Harold earlier now sat in shame-faced silence, their expensive watches suddenly seeming gaudy and meaningless compared to the humble timepiece that had carried such an important secret through the decades. "I understand perfectly," Harold replied, a spark of his younger self visible in his eyes. "I've spent years tracking these families, you see. In my retirement, I traveled the world, using my savings to build a database. Every survivor, every descendant, every story of loss and hope. It's all documented." He pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket, its pages filled with meticulous notes and family trees. One of the serving staff gasped audibly. She recognized a name in the notebook. "That's my grandmother's family," she exclaimed, tears forming in her eyes. "She told us about a painting, a Renoir that hung in their Paris apartment before." Harold nodded gently. "Portrait of a young girl with blue eyes," he said softly. "It's there, in the chamber. I've never touched it, never moved anything. Everything remains exactly as it was hidden, waiting for its rightful owners." The restaurant's owner, who had been summoned by the maitre d', stepped forward. "Mr. Jenkins, why come here tonight? Why not go directly to the authorities or a museum?" Harold's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Because sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight. I needed to be certain that the person who would carry on this mission would have not just the expertise, but the heart to see it through." He turned to Sarah. "I've followed your work, Ms. Chen. You've dedicated your life to returning lost art to its rightful owners. You understand that this isn't just about valuable paintings, it's about restoring a piece of people's souls." The other diners, many of whom were influential figures in the city's social and business circles, began offering their help. A prominent lawyer volunteered his services pro bono to handle the legal aspects of the restitution. A tech entrepreneur offered to digitize Harold's research and create a secure database. But it was the young executive who had filmed Harold earlier who made perhaps the most meaningful gesture. Standing up, he deleted the mocking video from his phone and instead asked if he could document Harold's story properly to ensure it would be preserved for future generations. Sarah, meanwhile, had begun examining the watch more closely. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary," she marveled. "The modifications to create the hidden compartment were done so skillfully that even expert watchmakers would miss them. This isn't just a timepiece, it's a masterpiece of wartime ingenuity." Harold nodded. "It was made by a Jewish watchmaker in the Resistance. He didn't survive the war, but his creation did, carrying within it the hope of justice for thousands." He paused, fighting back tears. "I've carried this watch every day since 1944, waiting for the right moment, the right person. Now, at last, I can fulfill my promise to Jean-Pierre." As the evening progressed, the restaurant became a hub of activity, with people offering their expertise and resources. But more importantly, it became a place of transformation, where prejudices dissolved in the face of an extraordinary story of courage, loyalty, and perseverance. What none of them knew yet was that the watch's secrets went even deeper than Harold had revealed. The coordinates weren't just to a cache of stolen art. They led to something that would shake the very foundations of post-war history. The following morning, Sarah arranged an emergency meeting at her auction house with Harold and a select group of experts. The modest conference room was a stark contrast to the previous night's setting, but the gravity of what was about to be revealed made the space feel almost sacred. As Harold carefully spread out his documentation on the conference table, he revealed the true magnitude of his secret. "The art cache," he began, his voice steady despite his age, "is only part of the story. What Jean-Pierre and I discovered goes far beyond stolen paintings and sculptures." He produced another hidden compartment in the watch, this one so cleverly concealed that even Sarah had missed it. Inside was a small key and a series of numbers written in a code that hadn't been used since the war. "This key opens a separate vault within the chamber," Harold explained. "Inside are documents that prove the collaboration of several major European banks in the Nazi gold transfer program." The room fell silent. Sarah's colleague, a historian specializing in World War II economics, leaned forward. "Are you saying you have proof of which banks helped the Nazis hide stolen assets?" Harold nodded gravely. "Not just proof. We have the complete paper trail. Account numbers, transfer records, names of executives who knew and profited from the theft. Jean-Pierre was more than just a resistance fighter. He was a banker before the war. He used his connections to document everything." The implications were staggering. Several of these banks had survived the war and grown into powerful financial institutions, their dark past carefully buried beneath decades of prosperity. The documents Harold had protected all these years could force them to finally acknowledge their role and make restitution to countless families. "This is why I've lived so modestly," Harold continued, gesturing to his worn clothes. "Any sudden change in my lifestyle, any hint of wealth, might have attracted attention from those who suspected the truth. There are still people in power who would do anything to keep these secrets buried." Sarah suddenly understood the full weight of what Harold had endured. "You weren't just protecting art treasures," she said softly. "You were protecting evidence of one of the largest financial conspiracies of the 20th century. The young executive from the restaurant, who had been invited to document everything, had stopped filming." "Mr. Jenkins," he said, his voice shaking, "do you realize what this means? The compensation claims alone would be in the billions." Harold's eyes filled with tears. "I think about the families every day, not just those who lost art, but those who lost everything. Their homes, their businesses, their life savings. The banks took it all, converted it, hid it. They built their modern empires on the ashes of stolen lives." As the group began discussing how to proceed, an unexpected visitor arrived. The restaurant server who had recognized her grandmother's painting had brought her elderly grandmother to the meeting. The old woman, supported by her granddaughter, walked directly to Harold. "I remember you," she said in French-accented English. "Paris, 1944. You were there the night they took everything. You were younger then, but those eyes, I never forgot those eyes. You promised me something that night." Harold stood, trembling. "Mademoiselle Sophie," he whispered, "you were just a child." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellow with age. It was a child's drawing of a family standing in front of a house with a blue door. "You drew this while your parents were packing," he said. "You gave it to me for safekeeping just before—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Sophie's parents had been taken away that night, never to be seen again. "You told me you would keep it safe until we met again," Sophie said, tears streaming down her face. "You said that as long as someone remembered, there was hope for justice." The room was silent, except for muffled sobs. This wasn't just about recovering valuable assets anymore. It was about healing wounds that had festered for generations. Harold's watch hadn't just preserved evidence, it had preserved hope itself. As Sarah began organizing teams to handle different aspects of the revelation, legal experts for the banking documents, art historians for the looted works, security for the eventual recovery mission, she noticed Harold looking at his watch one last time. "There's one more secret," he said quietly, "one that even Jean-Pierre didn't know about. And this one could change everything we thought we knew about how the war really ended." The final revelation came as the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the conference room windows. Harold, his strength seemingly renewed by the unburdening of his long-held secrets, made one final, incredible disclosure. "The watch doesn't just contain coordinates to art and banking records," he said. his hands steady as he manipulated the timepiece in a complex sequence. There's a third compartment, one that Jean-Pierre himself never knew about. Our superiors had given me a separate mission, one that had to remain secret even from our closest allies. With a barely audible click, a hidden panel in the watch's movement revealed itself. From it, Harold extracted a microchip, decades ahead of its time for 1944. "This," he said, holding it up to the fading light, "contains the true story of Operation Paperclip and the secret deals made in the final days of the war." Sarah gasped. "But that's impossible. Microchips didn't exist in 1944. "That's what makes this so extraordinary," Harold explained. "This technology came from a source that neither side was ready to acknowledge. The Americans and Soviets weren't just racing to capture Nazi scientists. They were racing to capture something else, something that had been discovered in a remote alpine facility. The microchip, he revealed, contained documents and photographs proving that both Allied and Axis forces had encountered something they couldn't explain, something that had influenced the course of the war and subsequent technological developments. The recovered Nazi banking records were just a cover for an even more profound secret. Evidence of advanced technology that had been suppressed and distributed among the victorious powers. "This is why I had to wait so long to come forward," Harold continued. "The world wasn't ready for this truth. Even now it may not be. But with the current state of technology and information sharing, it's finally time. The families deserve to know not just what happened to their art and assets, but why certain decisions were made in the aftermath of the war." Sophie, who had remained for this final revelation, suddenly spoke up. "The painting in our apartment, the Renoir. My father wasn't just a collector, was he?" Harold shook his head gently. "Your father was one of the leading scientists working on reverse engineering what they'd found. The art collection was his cover. The night they took your family, they weren't just after artwork." The implications stunned everyone in the room. The post-war technological boom, the space race, the Cold War, everything took on a new meaning in light of what Harold was revealing. The watch hadn't just preserved evidence of war crimes, it had protected a truth that could reshape our understanding of modern history. Sarah, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were dealing with, asked the crucial question, "What do you want us to do with all of this, Mr. Jenkins?" Harold smiled, for the first time looking truly at peace. "The truth has a way of coming out, my dear. Our job isn't to force it, but to prepare the way. The art will be returned, the banks will face justice, and as for the rest..." He gestured to the microchip. "This needs to be shared responsibly, piece by piece. The world needs time to understand its own history." The young executive who had mocked Harold just the day before now stood up, tears in his eyes. "I'll dedicate my media company to telling your story, sir. The world needs to know about heroes like you and Jean-Pierre." As the meeting concluded, Harold took one final look at the watch that had been his constant companion for 7 decades. With trembling hands, he removed it and placed it in Sarah's palm. "Your turn to be its guardian," he said softly. "There are more secrets in there, ones even I haven't discovered. The truth has many layers, and each generation must peel back what it's ready to face." The watch, now freed from its burden of secrecy, seemed to gleam with renewed purpose in Sarah's hands. It was more than a timepiece, more than evidence. It was a bridge between past and future, between justice delayed and justice delivered. As Harold left the auction house that evening, supported by Sophie and her granddaughter, he walked not as a shabby old man, but as a warrior who had finally completed his mission. The watch had found its new guardian. The truth was emerging from its long hibernation, and somewhere he felt Jean-Pierre was smiling. The story of the watch would continue, but Harold's part was done. He had kept his promise, protected the truth, and waited for the right moment to reveal it all. In the end, it wasn't the watch's monetary value that mattered, but the weight of the truth it had carried through time, waiting for the world to be ready to face it.